Trump and friends prefer alternative facts, but what you're about to see, they're just facts. To keep our show going and become a patron of Activist News, visit patreon.com/actout. This week, in a special hour-long episode, we not only fill you in on the actions from the streets of D.C. last weekend, we, more importantly, discuss, analyze, and project a path forward. Local D.C. musician, activist, and writer Jason Yawn will join me to talk tactics, what to do now, and the role of artists in the movement. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Today's episode is all about the events of this past weekend, and more importantly, about the road ahead. What did we take away, or indeed, what should we take away from the protests, marches, and rallies that will mean something past a pink pussy hat and a fuck Trump poster? For those of you multitasking while watching this, I recommend keeping an eye and an ear out for intermittent footage and slideshows that'll pop up throughout this hour-long special. And for those eager to hear some analytical conversation regarding tactics and tools, take a deep breath, because we're going to start with a basic rundown of events, and then we'll get to our sit-down with activist, anarchist, musician, and writer Jason Yawn after that. So, without further ado, let's dive right in by looking first at the events on J20. In the morning of J20, activists took to the streets as early as 5:30 a.m. in order to blockade the checkpoints along the inaugural parade route. As mentioned in last week's episode, each checkpoint had a theme: climate justice, the movement for Black lives, communities under attack, trade justice, economic justice, feminism, LGBTQ, SURGE, which stands for Standing Up for Racial Justice, labor, Standing Rock, and anti-war/Free Palestine. As the morning wore on, cross-issue solidarity formed impromptu marches and actions in the streets and at neighboring checkpoints. For example, at the anti-war checkpoint, the group Witness Against Torture showed up with a powerful display of activists dressed in Guantanamo jumpsuits and black bags. Later on, the labor contingency formed a human chain across the checkpoint, which not only brought renewed energy in the cold rain, but got the cops all riled up to push people around for a while before they eventually retreated back. And I gotta say, there is nothing quite like seeing a bunch of riot cops walk backwards while people flood back into the street. But don't just take my word for it. Take a look.
We are a peaceful protest! 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 Demilitarize! Free Palestine! Demilitarize! Free Palestine!
After being shoved around by the cops for a bit for, I guess, practice, activists bid those bastards adieu and proceeded to march towards the Movement for Black Lives checkpoint, where they received a warm welcome.
No justice, no peace. No racist police. No justice, no peace. No racist police. No justice, no peace. No racist police. We shut it down.
Once there, activists joined the blockade and for the next hour kept anyone from entering through the checkpoint, using not only their own bodies, but indeed the tools of the state to periodically shift and bend in order to maintain the blockade and their ultimate goal of disruption.
Our streets! Our streets! Our streets! Our streets! Our streets!
In the afternoon, many of the protesters congregated at Columbus Circle outside of Union Station to join in the Festival of Resistance permitted march, while others broke off to enjoy musical performances, attend teach-ins, speeches, or meetings at various points across the city. But what you probably heard most about were the black bloc tactics that left windows smashed, a limo, some trash cans, and some news kiosks on fire. Again, our analytical conversation about these tactics will come in just another few minutes, but for right now, let's just pause for a second and ask, why the fuck do I need to pause? Why does this tactic require an explanation, whereas blockade does not? Is it because that you feel breaking shit is wrong? Why? Is it because you equate the destruction of property with violence? If so, what's homelessness? What's poverty in the richest country in the world? We walk by that shit day after day and never ask for an explanation, but a Bank of America gets busted up and all of a sudden, everyone feels violated. Now, as you shall see in a minute, I'm not saying that I completely agree with all of the tactics that were used on Friday. Indeed, I feel splintered about some of what I saw, but it is important to understand the difference between shitting on a tactic and analyzing it. Our job as activists is to analyze tactics and strategy, to always question our methods so that they may get better and more efficient. Our job is also to support those who use tactics that we don't. Indeed, part of picking your battles is exchanging infighting for constructive conversation. Solidarity does not mean and should not mean that we all agree on everything. If the left ever wants even a semblance of unity, we have to accept that people disagree on shit, and that we will, and in fact need, to approach this with a diversity of tactics. Embrace it. Respect that. And again, ask yourself why you, if you do, feel more uncomfortable about a smashed Bank of America window than you do about a boarded-up window in a foreclosed home, courtesy of Bank of America. Why does a trash can on fire make you feel more uncomfortable than seeing a homeless person freezing? Take a look at this following video and try applying a lens of capitalist reality to it. These protesters we in the streets are the children of an empire drenched in the blood of its own people and the blood of innocents across the globe. We protesters have, and many still do, march in permitted marches, write petitions, and call our representatives, but along with that, we support, either through participation or active solidarity, the right and the need to escalate against a state that calls for a peaceful transition to neo-fascism in the midst of the most broad assault on people and planet that the world has ever seen. I mean, for fuck's sake. There's nothing peaceful about a transition of power when that power has its military stationed in 70% of the world's countries, including here at home.
Stay here, I'll do it.
Yeah, that's the military parading down the streets of D.C. The idea of keeping the peace on our streets is a fallacy. From rampant police brutality, the militarization of the police, the enslavement of prisoners, and the overarching and continued oppression of our own people and their ability to survive makes the idea of a peaceful transition a sick, twisted joke. Therefore, we protesters believe in a broad spectrum of tactics, applied purposefully and conscientiously, because we recognize that the state will apply violence without care or consideration, and they will apply it likewise in a variety of ways. Whether you agree with the application of these black bloc tactics or not, condemning them altogether not only betrays a place of privilege in feeling that you are immune to the violence of the state, thereby immune to the necessity of fighting back, but it also divides an already splintered left, promoting the establishment ideology that protest can only be confined to permitted kinds, thereby stripping it of any real protest value. So, maybe this doesn't make sense for you right now. Maybe it won't for quite some time. But watch this video and ask yourself what it would take for you to riot. What violence would need to be done to you before you fight back? And then ask if anyone in this country lives with that, if your solidarity with them might matter. Again, try to shift your paradigm to see this through the eyes of the oppressed, the eyes of the capitalist used, the corporately abused, the children of a blood-stained empire. Because believe it or not, you are somewhere on that spectrum.
Back up!
Oh, fuck, I need some water.
Please! Back up! They're spraying! They're spraying!
Police deployed tear gas, pepper spray, and stun grenades. Black Bloc used bricks and stones from the street and again set fire to a limo, some trash cans, and some news kiosks. They also smashed windows, including those of a Starbucks and a Bank of America. They also punched a fascist. And let me just say, it's okay for that to feel good. So, we'll get into a more in-depth analysis and discussion in a minute, but first, here are some images from the J20 events in DC to encourage a little inspiration and, indeed, rumination. Take a look.
We're all sick, tired, and wasted. We're all sick, tired, and wasted. You're not the only one. Low wage, debt's cage. Freedom comes in change. We're all sick, tired, and wasted.
Okay, so now that you have a pretty damn good idea of what took place on J20, let's dig in and get your hands dirty. Let's analyze and really knead all that together in that mental blender. And I'm mixing metaphors here, but to help us along with straightening all this shit out is Jason Yawn, frontman of the DC political punk band Free Children of Earth, anarchist, activist, writer, and podcast host. So, get cozy and let's dive in. So, let's talk about this shit. All right, let's start with J20. The protesters at the beginning of the day blockaded all along the parade route, making it difficult or, in fact, impossible for the few Trump supporters that did show up to make it to the parade. So I want to talk about this issue of the peaceful blockade. And at one point, even when the cops were pushing us back, the crowd chanted, "This is a peaceful protest." And then the cops were all riot geared up, but they pushed us out of the way, and then they kind of retreated as well. Mm-hmm. So the peaceful blockade. Let's talk about this as an efficient form of protest in terms of being able to disrupt or delay or indeed entirely shut shit down for a period of time. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think like with any tactic, context matters. Like the purpose of the action matters. I think it was very called for in terms of of J20. I think DC showed out and activists were in town to say that this is not a normal peaceful transition of power, and to do anything else but to point out and draw attention to the fact that to somehow wrap this man in any kind of normalization, pomp and circumstance, would be to endorse what we already know he is. He's a fascist. It's not a casual term to use. I don't like using it in the way some people blithely do. And I think it's called for a city to say, like, this isn't normal. We don't accept this guy. We're going to fight him from day one. And I think it was asking nicely, actually. When you're blockading, you're putting yourself at risk. You're not putting anyone else at risk. Now, there are times when streets can be blockaded, and if it's not on a day like that, and it's, say, like maybe a normal day of commuting, I don't know sometimes how effective that is in terms of pissing off the general public who are trying to get to work, or I've seen instances where it's been done very effectively and emergency vehicles can get through, but I've seen it done very shabbily and badly, and at the end of the day, not really open anybody's ears, and you're also not really attacking structure or a president or any kind of official power in some of those instances. So, to me, that's usually less effective in my mind.
I mean, without a message, it's kind of just like...
Right. And I think the message was very clear on J20. Like, you're not going to have this party go off the way you want it in our town. Seems fine to me.
So let's shift to the afternoon, because I know that you've worked with you are yourself an anarchist, and you've worked with Black Bloc before. And I want to talk about the tactics that were used in the afternoon, because there's been shit that's just, like, the internet's kind of exploded with kind of an argument about this. And I think it's important, before we dive into the analysis, to make it really incredibly crystal clear that the destruction of property is not violence.
No.
War is violence. Poverty is violence. Right. Homelessness is violence. The fact that this country does not have proper health care for its people is violence. Right. The structure of this country, profit over people and planet, is violence. The destruction of a Bank of America or Starbucks is not violence.
Right.
But I do also think that it's important that as activists, we analyze our tactics like we're doing now.
Of course.
And there's a difference between, as I said earlier, like shitting on a tactic and analyzing it.
Right.
So, and there was an article that actually came out on Saturday where a man involved with Black Bloc said this: "I'm not somebody who thinks that smashing every window is the way to go. Maybe that's kind of a wimpy Black Bloc perspective. I've seen Black Blocs where people commandeered construction vehicles and turned them on the police, and where they threw Molotov cocktails. Very aggressive tactics. Sometimes such tactics are called for and appropriate and warranted, and other times they're not. I think deciding what's appropriate and tactically warranted is a tough call, but it's important." So,
I completely agree with that sentiment. I think Black Bloc, first of all, Black Bloc is a tactic. It's not a group. It's not an organization. It's a tactic employed by people who are willing to mask up and put themselves at risk of having their lives completely destroyed if they're arrested for what they're engaging in. I know a lot of dedicated people who employ the tactic and who have employed the tactic effectively. On the other hand, it can be employed in a negative way, and people can filter in to a Black Bloc and pop off and do shit on their own accord that isn't cool with the rest of the group.
yeah.
That isn't cool with the spirit of why that Black Bloc was convened or employed, and that happens. And it is an inherent weakness that's always going to occur.
Right.
It's just like there's going to be idiots in every movement or any room. There's going to be idiots in every Black Bloc. But I don't think we should foreclose on those tactics. Like you said, violence is done to people. And what these people are opposing is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And I think to harp on what they're doing to banks and McDonald's, and even though I do think there is a real moral component to displacing workers from their employment, people who are earning a wage, people who are who you claim to be protecting and acting on behalf of. I think to harp on smashing windows when people will just tiptoe and whistle through their day, while ordinance falls on kids all over the world and debt repayment claims millions of lives every year in the world, the passive violence this system just meets out every day. I think it's ridiculous to harp on the Black Bloc. I think the lack of solidarity with people who are willing to engage in more radical tactics by people who don't feel comfortable with doing it themselves is a big problem.
And actually, even Snowden tweeted after J20, he tweeted, "Listen, it's all right to disagree with the protest, but diminishing them is what got us the problems we face today. Respect resistance."
Yes. I mean, at what point do you stop asking nicely? And why would you shit on people who are done with that noise? Like, we don't have much time left, like real time left, to completely change the way we organize ourselves on the planet and interact with our environment before we're done for as a species. So to me, the problem is not Black Blockers.
Right.
It is normal, everyday, prevailing life in the world. So that might sound like an alienated statement, but no, this is a system of violence, and violence that flows downward from the top is valorized, always. But you're a worker, you're an oppressed minority, you're a Black Blocker, And by the way, it's not all privileged white kids with trust funds engaging in Black Bloc tactics.
No.
That is to erase people of color who engage in radical resistance and who also work in solidarity with across lines. With Antifa. So I'm completely. I empathize greatly with the Black Bloc. I empathize with people who engage in armed struggle. I don't just think it's cool and chic to wear a Che Guevara shirt, and then say, but not here. Not
yeah,
here.
we can't do what the
Inappropriate.
Zapatistas did.
Inappropriate. No, I think you have to have. I think the discussion to have is at what point are your lives worth defending? No matter how comfortable you are right now in America, depending on your social strata, like at what point are the acceptable options just a way of cowing you to a system that's going to take you over the edge of a cliff, and all of us over the edge of a cliff.
And also like begs the question, like, is there such a thing as a useful tactic that doesn't, disrupt anything? Like,
No.
like
There's-
to
to
block
me-
people from getting to work or to
No.
smash a window.
No.
It's like, it's disruptive, but can you have an effective tactic by
No.
not pissing anyone off?
No, and to me, I'm actually against permitted marches.
Yeah.
I'm against asking for permission to assemble. We already have permission.
Yeah.
We already have permission, and we don't need that permission. We're just people on a planet. Like, I don't need permission from an illegitimate system. A system that was born from the greatest genocide in the history of man. I don't need permission to behave myself. I don't need to be admonished by that system that, oh, you might, I don't think that's acceptable. Let's all be civil. It's such a fucking joke. It's such a joke. Now, on the other hand, ideally, we're people of ideas. We would much rather not engage in these tactics. It's not romantic.
No.
It's not like people who engage in it because it's cool or it's fucking chic to be a rebel. I don't give I fucking despise that shit.
Yeah.
Because they're not there
For the right reasons.
for the right reasons. They're not out of measured consideration for their life, the lives of others, and what the fuck we're actually doing here. Like, so yeah.
And there was another good point made that, like, somebody pointed out that while Antifa was using these black bloc tactics just a few streets away, there was like a concert and people, kind of having this like peaceful protest. But
Sure.
media doesn't care about that. Media will cover
Right.
black bloc tactics, and so it's also a way to get this conversation about the violence perpetuated by the state onto media,
Yeah.
because they'll never care about you singing Kumbaya in a park.
Well, if you're also expecting media to provide context
Well, yeah.
and actually endorse or put on television a discussion between radicals and moderates, like why we do this, why we don't, in a long form, so that it actually matters, and not just slam it between Boeing and Lockheed Martin commercials. You're fucking crazy. They're not interested in what is. They're not interested in the purpose of the protest. They like spectacle. They like big crowds. They like you to behave yourself. And if you're not going to behave yourself, they're never going to put a camera and a microphone in front of one of these people who's engaging in black bloc tactics and say, "Why are you here? Talk to us. Like, we want to know. Like, why you've taken this decision with your life."
But alternative media
to engage.
But alternative media this conversation is happening on alternative media sites,
Absolutely.
which is important because I think a lot of the comments that I was reading, people who had never even thought about it before were saying, that makes sense, or I don't agree with this, but I agree with your right to do it or whatever. So I think
Sure.
the conversation is happening.
Well,
and it
it's
needs
another
to.
reason why it is happening. I'm just saying, like, the media that most people, in a dwindling number though,
Right.
are taking in, corporate media, will never
Right.
do that. And but it's another reason they're dying.
Yeah.
It's another reason why alternative media is ascendant. So good. I'm glad. In a way, I'm glad they don't. I hope they die. I hope they. I'm not wishing death on Chris Matthews. I'm just saying. I hope
But
their
you'd go to the
institutions.
funeral.
I hope he's jobless. I hope he's jobless and blabbering about, bullshit and interrupting people at a bus stop somewhere. That's what I want.
So specifically, like going back to Friday, specifically, how do you feel? How do you feel about the tactics that were used on Friday afternoon?
Well, I saw appropriate usage, and I saw stuff that didn't make any sense to me.
Such as?
I mean, Bank of America is an instrument of violence all over the world. McDonald's is an instrument of violence all over the world. These corporations are violent private tyrannies. They're not happy golden arches and friendly clowns. They're not providing opportunity or whatever. So I don't give a fuck about a McDonald's. I don't give a fuck about a bank. But I see, cars of probably a wage worker being smashed up, and I'm like, okay, this guy made $7 an hour today, and he's coming back to his car, like, fantastic. I'm totally on board with this revolution, guys. Like, and I see I saw a couple mom and pops getting smashed. Now, that was the vast minority of, people can marginalize the entire black bloc and what happened on Friday because of those things, or they can say a couple people popped off and did some dirt that sucks. Meanwhile, I do think it's important to confront the system on the street. I don't necessarily think, even though I love the Women's March, I loved what that symbolized, but what is it unless we're continuing something today? It can be rendered a spectacle only, just like the Black Bloc can be rendered just a spectacle if we don't act. I wrote something the other day that, this whole weekend, the radical tactics and the permitted tactics prove that in vast numbers, people are wanting to affirm the creative, constructive, collaborative, collective energies that will mean we win ultimately. But we're conduits for those energies, and unless we make fearless choices right now and engage and act, sentiment doesn't mean shit. I don't have time for it.
And even, like, shifting to the Women's March, like, even that sentiment, like, I mean, I went out there, and I think I'm the only person on the internet that wasn't so inspired by what I saw, but there were so many pro-Hillary people, there were so many, like, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was out there, John Kerry was out there, like, the instrument of this system were out there kind of, I guess...
It was co-opted in a lot of ways. But I don't know if the vast majority of people out there are co-opted, or if just the microphone was. You know what I mean? Like, I can't. I think a lot. I know my friends and friends who aren't necessarily radical or particularly political are engaged in a way and activated in a way right now because of all this, for better or worse. Whether it sucks that it took Donald Trump for people to be outraged about our reality. So I think people are engaged in a way that I've not seen. But I do think it's because they're terrified.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what you're willing to endorse, or how radical and political you're willing to get when it's in your fucking kitchen.
Yeah.
It's real easy to be moderate and milquetoast and all neoliberal and, weekend warrior do-goody when, it's just people over there in brown countries being harmed, right?
Exactly.
And it's amazing how much on the same note, it's amazing how many radical tactics people of privilege here will endorse there.
Right.
But not here. Not here. Because it's just, I got to get to work, or
Yeah, well, it's the
just
same.
ugly. It could get out of hand, you know.
There are a lot of people that, you talk to them about, like, the Zapatistas, for example. And,
Yes.
the armed takeover of towns, and they say, like, oh, well, that made perfect sense. But if you talk about that happening in D.C., or in, somewhere in
Yeah.
Kentucky, they're
not
horrified.
allowed. It's not allowed.
Yeah.
Not here.
So-
Why? Never heard a good answer for it.
Because there isn't one.
No.
So with I interviewed a woman who's an activist in Australia about a week ago, and she made the point that with the Second Iraq War, millions of people worldwide took to the streets and said they don't want war, and yet once that first bomb dropped on Baghdad, everyone was like, well, I guess I can't do anything else here.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Because the spectrum of acceptable tactics renders everyone toothless and completely irrelevant to power. If you're willing to say, hey man, I'm only going to engage in tactics that I can get grant money for, or I'm going to only engage in tactics that they'll permit me to do, or that the most Gandhian notions of the world, this Pollyannish notion that somehow if we send waves of loving kindness to fucking Donald Trump or George W. Bush or Barack Obama, that they're all of a sudden not going to, shred babies up with drone bombs.
Right.
It's fucking insane. It's literally, it's internalized insanity. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to foreclose on tactics. It's not to say, hey man, go out there and snipe at the cops, or go out there and, that's bullshit.
Right.
That's stupid. But to foreclose on a tactic when you are ostensibly saying, I am facing the most violent entity in the world that's willing to kill millions of people just for, dinosaur bones in the ground.
Right.
Liquefied dinosaur bones. But somehow my candlelight vigil is going to shame these monsters into changing. It's irresponsible. You want to talk about irresponsible actions? An irresponsible worldview? Let's sing them a song. Hey, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I'm not above criticism. I scribble and sing songs about this shit, hopefully changing people's minds, because I do think consciousness is the first thing you need to change. It's primary, But I'm talking as a protest tactic, as a resistance tactic. People are unrealistic. And if you're gonna foreclose on, if you're gonna tell that entity, that violent entity, hey, I'm gonna do everything in my power up to this point that I feel comfortable with to defeat you, but nothing else, they're going to say, cool, enjoy your permit. Walk down the fucking street like a bunch of fucking cattle and see if I give a fuck.
Yeah.
Right? So if we're going to complain that this system needs to be displaced and because we don't have enough time and fuck these people, if we aren't willing to also do what's necessary to win, we deserve all the criticism in the world too.
Yeah, and to get
Assata
uncomfortable.
Assata Shakur said the first duty of a revolutionary is to win. Pretty simple. And it's not, it's simple without ignoring the complexity of the picture. It's
Right.
with full acknowledgement of the complexities of the picture.
I think it's that idea that people shit on tactics because they feel that no matter they'll still have their privilege even if Donald Trump is president.
Sure.
I'll just
It'll be
sit back
fine.
here and I will go to this permitted march because I feel that at the end of the day I'll still be okay. Debbie
Right.
Wasserman Schultz does not think that she's going to lose her house at any point. So
Right.
she's cool, I'll put on a pink shirt and stand next to some women in pussy hats and
Right.
it's all chill.
Well, as a couple of my mentors from the American Indian movement say, pacifism today, pacifism when it's employed while people are still incurring risk, like the way the Berrigans did, or, when you're still putting yourself at risk but saying, I will not do violence, that's admirable. But pacifism today, largely in the way it's employed and rhetorically bandied about and, just exploited,
Right.
is a way of privileged people avoiding risk and avoiding recognizing that their own skin is in the game. Because you're right. Privilege means that no matter what happens, I'm gonna be fine. Hey, we gave it a try.
Yeah.
Right? Well, there are communities that can't afford that shit, and they deserve your solidarity. And when you say, I will go this far and no further, not only does power say, hey, go fuck yourself, I don't care, but communities that are on the wrong end and are most destroyed and degraded and exploited by this, by the system, recognize that you're really not on their side.
Yeah.
They're abandoned. So, it's on us. That's the real lesson of the weekend. This is cool. This was great. What happened this weekend was great. To see numbers of people who of good intent, no matter whether, on the same page politically or not, to see people of good intent and those massive numbers dwarf the fascists.
Right.
Was awesome to see. And I think people needed it for their own souls. But, okay, good start. Let's go. Let's do it.
So with regards to what's next, on Sunday morning, the Women's March website put out a call for 10 actions in the first 100 days.
That's great.
The first of which is sending your senator a postcard telling them what you feel is the most important issue. Thoughts on that?
Hey, look, I think everybody should call their so-called representatives. Do that, but don't think that that's gonna do anything. I mean, do it because it's available to you. And do it because they actually do make a calculus. I think it's like, if they get 100 phone calls, they assume 10,000 people care about it. So there is look, when Barack Obama tried to first start the war in Syria,
Right.
phone calls to Congress stopped that shit cold. People don't remember that.
Yeah.
I think it was 2014, 2013.
I thought it was 2015.
2015, no, like the original attempt to ramp up the interventionist regime change rhetoric. It stopped it cold. They had to go to the tactic of arming Al Qaeda and arming ISIS because they couldn't just have an overt war.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's not effective. It's definitely effective, but don't do that and then sit on your fucking couch.
Right.
Don't go. If you're gonna argue to me for voting, okay. If you're gonna vote, then do something. Then do something every day between election days.
Yeah.
And then I'll listen to you. I think that it takes all kinds of actions. I'm not poo-pooing on anything in particular, but just let's get serious. Let's get serious, and that it may not all be pleasant.
Yeah. Put it in the appropriate context. Like petitions are cool
Right.
and good, but
and
you have to
they
put it in
work
a larger
sometimes.
context.
And they work sometimes. In the larger context, though, we're talking about dismantling a system.
Right.
We're not talking about asking it nicely to reform itself. It's not going to. The system will not reform itself to the point where human beings are going to be anything but a memory in 200 years.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
So finally, now that we've talked about those tactics, I do want to talk about the role of art and music, because that is a lot
Sure.
of what you do.
Sure.
And
I
on
felt
Friday,
way too serious there for a minute.
I'll have a drink.
Yeah.
On Friday night, you organized a huge concert in D.C., like Sounds of Resistance, and anti-capitalist, anti-fascist. Talk about the need for this and why those sort of events are important.
Well, not only for a catharsis or a rallying point for people who are in town and who live here, who wanted a place to go to be together and kind of have a release. That's an important part of music. But free expression in and of itself, in the context of a creeping fascism, is resistance. It's a statement of resistance. Fascists come after arts. Hitler called anything that he didn't approve of degenerate art. Mm-hmm. So this is a thing, and in D.C. in particular, people watching this around the world or nationally might not know, but the alt-right, the Nazis,
Yeah.
The neo-Nazis, who are ascendant on the orange coattails of Trump, have engaged in a campaign of trying to shut down DIY all ages punk rock spaces, places where people have gathered, homes, small gathering places, in the interest of shutting down the arts in Washington D.C. and shutting down arts that are particularly leftist, as they perceive. So this is it was really important for the arts community. All the bands that were involved, Katie Greer from the band Priest played. We had a beautiful crowd, sold out crowd. We all thought it was really important to do this as a statement from the arts community in DC, and I think it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It went off perfectly. No Nazis showed up, which was great. It's very important, and it's also important because we raised money for Casa Ruby, which is a local shelter for abused and homeless transgendered people, a community that's going to be under attack in the Trump regime, and One DC, which is an anti-gentrification organization fighting displacement of residents in DC. Now, it's just important because to build solidarity. Solidarity is our greatest weapon against the system, because the people who are in power and the marginal number of people who are vastly wealthy off of this murder machine are vastly outnumbered by us.
Exactly.
If we get together across color and class lines and gender lines and orientation lines and fight back. They don't stand a chance against a realized solidarity. So in a multifaceted way, that was the idea behind the event, and it was great. It needs to happen. A lot more needs to happen. We want to do a tour behind this idea. We want to put on events in every city in the country we can go to that are similar. We want to do a comedy version of this event because a lot of stand-up comedians that I know and people in that realm want to be a part of the same agenda. So I think it's a start. That our job is the same.
Yeah.
Not let the other night just be a one-off. We've got to make it be a rolling campaign.
And indeed that art and music are not just ways to get away from the reality of the situation. It is in fact a tactic. It's a way of engaging people who aren't already on your side in a way that maybe black bloc tactics can't.
Well, no, I mean art should be, as Nina Simone said, art should be showing society's face, should be reflective of the society you live in, and should challenge power. It should challenge oppression. It should challenge the prevailing corruptions. And so, and I'm not saying, a love song isn't in and of itself a great thing. I'm just saying, art, when it is its most powerful, is usually challenging power. Yeah.
So, on that note, what would you, going forward...
Have I made sense?
Yes.
I'm extraordinarily tired.
Well, I think we're all going to be tired for a long time.
Yeah. No, that's the idea. That's the idea.
That's why you have your beverage of
Yes.
choice there.
Yeah.
But, going forward, what would you say to people who might have been to the Women's March and did feel inspired, or even went to J20 and saw some blockades and felt inspired? How do people plug into this shit, and how do they move forward? Us seasoned activists might have an idea of where we're going, but some people might just feel like they're floating and kind of what the fuck now?
Yeah. Well, a lot of DC people were at those marches and actions, but a lot of people came from elsewhere. Go do the same thing in your hometown. Organize locally, organize your communities, engage in actions on a local level. Don't let retrograde legislation pass, and challenge your local police department, challenge your local school board, challenge your mayor. Get in their fucking faces. They deserve no quarter. They serve you, supposedly. Let's make sure that's the case. As long as these institutions and these offices exist, let's make sure that they don't get to represent violent, moneyed interests that have no interest in human life. No more. Can't go. Can't do it. Can't afford it. So go home, reach out, start a meetup, get events going in your own town. Go from there. Then let's bring it back to the commons on a national level, and then we'll show them real number. We'll see how the numbers have swelled, you know. But numbers aren't everything. Like getting to the root of the problem, asking ourselves, what are we fighting for? And then taking it into the street. Don't ask permission.
Don't ask permission. That right there has, for me, been a big takeaway in my activism journey. To be ungovernable by those who have no right to govern. And that is why, as I said, I personally didn't feel overwhelmingly inspired by what happened on Saturday. I felt, as I have for quite some time, hopeful but not optimistic. If you felt so inspired by marching on Saturday, amen. I have no intention of talking you out of that inspiration, quite the opposite. As Jason pointed out, use that inspiration, because the real show of solidarity, the real show of people power has yet to come. It remains to be seen if the events of the weekend, in particular the Women's March, were enough to shake people awake, to suck the apathy out of people enough that they stay woke. Or if it will go down as another really impressive show of how many people disagree with the status quo, but just aren't quite ready to do anything about it. We need people that aren't just willing to walk, but who are willing to fight. As Micah White voiced in The Guardian the Thursday before the march, without a clear path from march to power, the protest is destined to be an ineffective, feel-good spectacle adorned with pink pussy hats. He goes on to outline the Women's March on Versailles in the early days of the French Revolution. From the initial march of about 7,000 to the Hôtel de Ville in Paris, the seat of government at the time, to the raid of the Armory, to the March on Versailles, where by that point 60,000 women essentially forced King Louis to march back with them to Paris. These women shifted the trajectory of history by refusing to ask permission, by refusing to beg the king for reform, something that was still very popular amongst many French citizens at the time. That was 60,000 women in 1789. The Women's March on D.C. this past Sunday was 500,000 strong. Should we have stormed the White House and dragged Trump into the streets? Maybe, maybe not. But as Jason said, what matters now is what people do next, what people build next. And what we build has to be designed and executed along the lines of our primary objectives and goals. We need that diversity of tactics, from black bloc to incessant phone calls, and we need to understand when and where to deploy these tactics. For example, what was the goal of the Women's March? To show Trump and the fascist patriarchy that we're not going to take it, to quote Mr. D. Snyder? Well, how does this tactic embody that message? How does it make it painfully clear that you are ready? Ready to rattle some fucking thrones and overthrow some fascists? As we move forward, these are the questions that we will need to ask. We will need to analyze and fluidly grow, evolve, so that our movements can evolve as well. We will have to be very honest about the reality of making significant change without inconveniencing anyone. As in, that's not possible. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to give and give up? Who are you willing to make uncomfortable? Your friends, your family, yourself? Think creatively, think locally, consider your goals and act accordingly. Trump united the world against Trump. We know what he's about, what he can and most likely will do. The question now is, what will we do? For more on Jason's work, check out freechildrenoferarth.bandcamp.com and at thebarricadespodcast.com. Thank you so much for watching this week's special dose of dissent. Please do spread and share it with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Check out the last slide to see all the sites mentioned in this week's show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.